What happens when 9 countries come together to defend Palestinian rights at the highest court in the world, The Hague? You get something called the Hague Group. This newly formed coalition of countries say they refuse to remain passive in the face of international crimes and genocidal actions committed by Israel. The countries that came together to form the Hague Group include the US and Israel and just joking. It's actually South Africa, Malaysia, Colombia, Cuba, Bolivia, Honduras, Namibia, the Senegal and Belize. So we spoke to Miss Varsha Gandikota, one of the people spearheading this international coalition.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Mohammed. The other way to say it's born out of necessity is to say it should not have been born at all. That something like the Hague Group would not be formed in a world where the international order was actually upheld. It's only in a world where we somehow allow the documented killing of nearly 61,000 civilians is where the Hague Group has to emerge, because every other institution of global accountants of global governance has failed or is actively being undermined by some of the most powerful countries, in the world that have been giving military support, political cover, and diplomatic aid to Israel, the occupying power and the genocidal machine in this case. So it's extremely important for us to bring together a group that could engage in collective action, being very clear that we were drawing lessons from history, that at the end of the day, it was only collective action that brought down apartheid South African regime. How could we once again have such a group that could take down the genocidal machine of today in the case of Palestine?
So what particularly led to the choice of these countries forming the Hague Group, particularly from those 3 continents rather than other continents and other countries closer to Palestine, closer to what's happening?
Sure. So it's a tricontinental bloc of 9 nations: Malaysia, South Africa, Namibia, Senegal, Bolivia, Belize, Honduras, Cuba, that all came together on 3 inaugural measures, which are: one, on upholding, in the case of state parties, the ICC warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, which, as we know now, are once again being actively threatened with the executive order by President Trump yesterday sanctioning the International Criminal Court. And in the case of non-state parties too, and it's important for me to mention this because Cuba and Malaysia, 2 founding member countries of the Hague Group, are not parties to the Rome Statute, but still acknowledge their obligations under the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, which states very clearly that Israel's presence in Palestine is unlawful as of the opinion of July 2024, which is binding, by the way, according to the UN Charter, as to what states' own legal obligations are. And it also states very clearly that it's important to ensure accountability both at the national and at the international level, not just for past crimes, but to ensure that future crimes don't occur once again. And so these are all states coming together to talk about accountability and upholding and ensuring that they bring Israeli state actors that have committed these heinous crimes to justice. The second is on provision or transfer of arms and military equipment to Israel. This, of course, we know has been the big demand, a full arms embargo against Israel. Once again, remembering the lessons of history, the Lusaka Manifesto, the conference in Delhi, in fact, against the apartheid South African regime, eventually the UN Security Council's arms embargo that did break through the apartheid regime's strength. In this moment, these 9 nations have pledged to not prevent any and all transfer or provision of arms and equipment to Israel where they can be used in the genocide against the Palestinian people. And the third is on blocking vessels. So a legal obligation to ensure no transfer of arms also means that we will not allow our ports and our land to be on our territorial jurisdiction to facilitate these essentially weapons of death to be used against our fellow brothers and sisters in Palestine. And so that's a blocking of vessels that may be carrying jet fuel or weaponry from using any of the ports in this network. So there are two key points here. One, of course, is of a united front and collective action and being able to say we stand in defense of multilateralism and we stand in defense of international institutions that are being actively undermined. But the second is a question of coordinated action. We know that the huge logistics networks that span across all of our lands are being used only by one side effectively to disguise themselves as civilian ships or to say these are dual-use items and bring weapons over to Israel, but we are unable to track across every single port and cut off materially the arteries of the genocidal machine. And that's why this coordinated move becomes so important. These 3 continents that are covered here, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, if in a sense don't have a direct geopolitical stake right? The question of Palestine for them is not a border question. It's not a regional question. But in the face of ICC sanctions and real risk of the United States coming at them, as we've seen in the days before the formation of the Hague Group, with Trump's reaction to Colombia, Trump's reaction to Mexico, and the very real punishment he's been meting out, and now to South Africa, using their land bill to once again clamp down on them. And of course, we've seen this in the past too, with the US House actually presenting a bill to review all bilateral relations with South Africa because it brought the Genocide Convention case to the ICJ. Even in the face and a very clear risk of these kind of unpredictable and brutal punishment from the United States, this tricontinental bloc that has no direct geopolitical stake, has decided to stick their necks out as governments to say, we will form the conscience of the world and stand up for international law. So I think that choice is really quite important and from here, we hope to, of course, build forward, including the Arab world and including Europe, who both have completely different locuses, but as you say, a much kind of closer, proximate stake to Palestine.
At what level is the participation of each of the representatives in the Hague Group? Is it at the highest state level, or is it ambassadors or officials or groups within the countries, or is it at the highest level? Is it state participation?
It's at the highest level. These are states that have officially signed on. The mandates, of course, the representatives in the room that you would have seen on the 31st of January at The Hague in the Netherlands are from different levels. There have been representatives of foreign ministries. There's sometimes been special envoys from the president or the prime minister's office. And in other cases, it has been their ambassadors or agents to the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court in The Hague in the Netherlands. But their participation is at the state level, straight from the presidencies and from the foreign ministries.
Okay, what kind of things do you think that the Hague Group will be able to achieve that thus far the ICJ and the ICC and any other court or justice entities have not been able to achieve?
Sure. One is a question of infrastructure. So if you look at the ICC warrants, for example, the ICC has no infrastructure of its own to enforce any arrest warrants. It's not like it has a police force or an investigation team to go out and prosecute criminals, right? It relies on its member states to enforce its orders. And we're now operating in a scenario where countries like France and Austria and Hungary have openly declared that they will defy the ICC warrants. Of course, Netanyahu has now traveled to Washington, D.C. with no threat of arrest whatsoever, has done the same, or was going to do the same with Poland, has done the same with Switzerland. What we hope to do as the Hague Group gets bigger and bigger is really turn the whole world into a no-go map for Israeli state actors that have violated international crimes. And we're seeing this already with soldiers, for instance, who have recorded themselves over the last 15 months committing international crimes and now are seemingly vacationing on beaches in Brazil and Costa Rica and Chile, and suddenly realizing that they've got cases on them for these crimes. And in fact, they've received now instructions from a few months ago, I can't remember the date, from the Israeli government to not record themselves anymore because they know that this evidence is being used against them. And that is the accountability that we seek, not just at the international level symbolically in terms of arrest warrants, but really in material terms in every national jurisdiction for war criminals of the Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people to not go free. The second in terms of impact, I would say, is really is that of coordination, right? We know, for instance, that even in the case of countries where there is political will to stop a ship or a boat, that the ships wear different disguises. They're sometimes not listed as actually heading to the Israeli defense industry. A ship may be empty at the time that it's coming to my port, but it may be going to pick up jet fuel from another port and then heading to Israel. So to be able to really materially cut off that chain, we need a coordination network. And that's what we hope that a full-fledged infrastructure from the Hague Group will be able to do.
And that would obviously, as you said, rely on each of the states playing their role, and using their law enforcement powers,
Yeah, one thing I might add here, which is interesting, if you look at the UN resolution of September 2024 that outlines what are the legal obligations of states under the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, majority of the countries in the world already signed on to these obligations, right? It was over 124 nations that signed on, and that list is much broader than even these three measures that the Hague Group has committed to now. So part of what these 9 nations have done by pulling these commitments from within the halls of the UN into the broader public political sphere is, I believe, a call for self-accountability. They have said we shall hold ourselves accountable in the public sphere and are kind of presenting ourselves to be audited by the people within our own nations, by civil society that have been working on these campaigns in other parts of the world. And you are allowed to now question us. So one, in this kind of, I think there's a beautiful symmetry here. As we fight impunity, we're also ensuring that we ourselves do not remain immune or impugn to our own commitments and are holding ourselves accountable.
Like, kind of fast forward to the most recent Trump statements about there's no kind of sugarcoating it, ethnic cleansing and mass population transfer of everybody in Gaza. He said that the US will take over Gaza. Where does the Hague Group come into this? What kind of things would the Hague Group want to do to kind of stand in the way of this?
The first I would say is call it what it is, right? Which is ethnic cleansing, which much of the world is refusing to do. And certainly the Anglophone press is, I mean, it's bizarre to look at the reportage of Trump's remarks and see the words redevelopment, see the words reconstruction, some of them describing them as dazzling plans for peace. And I know we shouldn't be surprised 15 months into the genocide, but it really is still shocking that the thing that's clarifying about Trump versus Biden is that he actually says things as they are, right? There's no more kind of disguise. And even in that scenario, you see media outfits really shilling with the presidency and disguising what are just basically blatantly, brazenly illegal proposals. The Hague Group firmly rejects, of course, these proposals for annexation and annexation of Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And we hope to be able to once again hold up international law, both in the region as well as a collective group across the region, to ensure that these proposals never see life.
The route that Netanyahu would have taken from Israel to America, does that fly over any of the countries that are involved in the Hague Group? No, right?
No.
So,
No.
so what do you think of him traveling there and the use of airspaces? Because technically, if a person with an ICC arrest warrant travels over a certain country's airspace, they have a right to somehow arrest them. I don't know how that would logistically work, but um, but what do you think of that? Now it seems like Netanyahu is having to rethink some of his moves. And what do you think the future of that will be like, and the further participation of countries within your organization, and then respecting international law? What do you think the future of that will look like?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about curtailing airspace and curtailing his travel over airspace, but we're not even there yet. I'd say we're at a position where don't give him a platform and seat him on stage in Switzerland and allow him to speak. Right? I would like to see that stopped first before we can even get to the question of airspaces and stopping him from going to other countries. But certainly Europe is key to this. I think we're seeing such a break now with President Trump's really, again, I want to make clear the kind of final iteration of the mask off empire phenomenon, if I may call it that I hope will make it harder for European nations to continue to basically talk the language of international law, but not walk it when it comes to holding Israeli state actors accountable. And that finally now in 2025, we may see them begin to enforce at national levels the very same laws and the very same accountability that they've been pushing on global South nations for decades now in all of the conflicts that we've seen before.